In a shocking and unprecedented statement, top Kenyan leaders have issued a stark warning to the entire African continent about the rising influence of Ibrahim Traoré and his military government in Burkina Faso. The young captain, who took power in 2022 through a coup, has been hailed by millions across Africa as a symbol of defiance against Western dominance. But now, Kenya's political elite are voicing fears that his example could destabilize the entire continent and destroy Africa's fragile progress. Speaking to local and international media, senior Kenyan officials described Traoré's rule as reckless, dangerous, and a ticking time bomb. They argue that while his anti-imperialist rhetoric may resonate with many Africans frustrated by decades of poverty and foreign exploitation, his methods, ruling through military might, dismantling democratic institutions, and cracking down on opposition, set a dangerous precedent. One prominent Kenyan senator declared, "We cannot romanticize military juntas simply because they speak against the West. What Ibrahim Traoré is doing in Burkina Faso is tearing apart the social fabric of his country. If Africa follows his path, we risk a domino effect of coups, instability, and bloodshed that could take us back 50 years. This warning comes just weeks after Traoré announced even bolder measures to sever ties with former colonial powers and declared the creation of an anti-West African coalition with Mali and Niger, also under military regimes. Many young Africans have been celebrating this new alliance as a long overdue rejection of neocolonialism. In Nairobi, however, Kenyan leaders see it differently. Kenya's Foreign Affairs Ministry released an official statement saying, "While we respect the sovereignty of the people of Burkina Faso, Kenya firmly believes that the path to African freedom and development lies in strengthening democratic governance, not dismantling it. Military rule has historically brought more suffering to our people than prosperity." In their statement, they cited examples of failed military regimes from Africa's past, including Uganda under Idi Amin and Nigeria's long periods of military dictatorship, which brought economic collapse and human rights violations. Kenyan leaders fear that if Traoré's model is copied elsewhere, Africa could slide into a new era of coups, authoritarianism, and economic isolation. On the streets of Nairobi, reactions to the government statement are mixed. Some ordinary Kenyans agree with their leaders, saying that while Traoré's anti-colonial stance is inspiring, it's dangerous to abandon democracy and free elections. Others argue that Kenya's own leaders are corrupt and beholden to Western interests, and they see Traoré as a hero for standing up to France, the U.S., and multinational corporations exploiting Africa's resources. Political analysts note that Kenya, a relatively stable democracy and a key Western ally in East Africa, is worried about growing instability in the Sahel spreading to the rest of the continent. Already, the rise of military regimes in West Africa has emboldened opposition movements in other countries. Some activists in East Africa have begun calling for similar coups to remove what they call puppet governments serving Western interests. One Kenyan political scientist explained, "The fear is real. Ibrahim Traoré may genuinely believe he is freeing his people, but history shows that military governments rarely hand power back to the people. And once you legitimize the idea that armed men can simply overthrow elected governments, where does it end?" Despite the warnings, Traoré remains immensely popular among young Africans, particularly those disillusioned by the failures of democracy to deliver real change. His fiery speeches, calls for Pan-African unity, and rejection of IMF and World Bank policies have earned him millions of followers on social media and widespread admiration across the continent. But Kenyan leaders are urging caution. calling on Africans to remember the price of abandoning democratic principles. They insist that Africa must chart its own course, but through the ballot box, not the barrel of a gun. As the debate rages on, one thing is clear. Ibrahim Traoré's rise has shaken Africa's political landscape like few others in recent history. Whether he becomes the liberator Africa has been waiting for or the trigger for another cycle of chaos is a question only time will answer. For now, Kenya is making its position clear. The continent cannot afford to gamble its future on military strongmen. Whether Africans agree or not, the warning has been sounded. In the wake of Kenya's warning about Ibrahim Traoré's military rule, another dramatic development has unfolded, this time from within West Africa itself. Reports emerging from Ghana reveal that a secret meeting of high-ranking officials was held in Accra last week to discuss what regional leaders are calling the Traoré dilemma. According to insiders, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, is deeply divided over how to handle the rising influence of Burkina Faso's young military leader and his growing anti-Western coalition with Niger and Mali. Some ECOWAS member states, notably Nigeria and Ghana, are said to be pushing for stronger sanctions and even the possibility of deploying troops to restore constitutional order in Burkina Faso. They argue that Traoré's defiance of ECOWAS rules and his withdrawal from the bloc are a direct threat to regional stability and unity. One Ghanaian diplomat reportedly stated during the meeting, "If we let Ibrahim Traoré continue unchecked, more militaries across the continent will overthrow governments. ECOWAS will become meaningless and Africa will descend into chaos." This is not just about Burkina Faso. This is about saving Africa from tearing itself apart. However, the meeting also exposed a growing rift among African leaders. Several delegations, including those from Guinea and Sierra Leone, reportedly refused to endorse harsh measures against Traoré. They argued that the young leader represents the legitimate frustration of African youth with corrupt civilian governments and neocolonialism. In fact, outside the meeting hall in Accra, dozens of demonstrators, many waving flags of Burkina Faso and chanting pro-Traoré slogans, gathered to demand that ECOWAS stop interfering in the affairs of sovereign nations. One young protester told reporters, "Traoré is not the problem. He is the solution. He is the only leader brave enough to say no to France and America. ECOWAS should listen to its people instead of serving foreign masters." Analysts say the split within ECOWAS highlights just how much Traoré's rise has shaken Africa's political order. For decades, ECOWAS has been seen as a guardian of democracy in the region, often stepping in to prevent or reverse military coups. But with Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali all under military rule and openly defying the bloc, ECOWAS faces perhaps its greatest test yet. Meanwhile, Traoré himself remains defiant. In a televised address this week, he dismissed calls for a return to civilian rule and accused ECOWAS of being a tool of Western powers. "We will never kneel," he declared. "We are building a new Africa, one that belongs to Africans, not to Paris, not to Washington." For now, tensions in the region continue to rise. ECOWAS is reportedly preparing for an emergency summit to decide its next steps, while pro-Traoré demonstrations are spreading to other West African capitals. Whether Africa's leaders can find common ground or whether Traoré's movement will trigger a new wave of military takeovers and confrontations remains to be seen. But one thing is undeniable. The young captain from Burkina Faso has forced Africa to confront hard questions about sovereignty, democracy, and the true meaning of independence. And as the continent debates his vision, the stakes have never been higher. Asterisk. In yet another surprising twist to the growing Ibrahim Traoré saga, a leaked intelligence report this week has revealed that several Western nations are allegedly planning covert operations to undermine his government and neutralize his influence. Across Africa. The report, which was first published by a Pan-African investigative outlet, claims that intelligence agencies from France, the United States, and at least 2 European Union member states have been meeting secretly to coordinate a campaign against Traoré and his allies in Mali and Niger. Asterisk, according to the leak. The operation, codenamed Project Phoenix, includes funding opposition groups, ramping up media propaganda, sabotaging key infrastructure projects in Burkina Faso, and infiltrating his inner circle to create internal divisions. Asterisk 1. Anonymous African intelligence official quoted in the report sighed, Traoré's rhetoric and actions have made him public enemy number 1 for the West. They fear he is inspiring a whole generation of African youth to rise up against their economic and political control. They won't just sit and watch. Asterisk, the revelations have sparked outrage across West Africa, where many see them as proof of what Traoré has long claimed, that powerful Western nations are determined to keep Africa divided and submissive to their interests. Asterisk, in Ouagadougou, thousands of Burkinab poured into the streets to protest the alleged plot, waving placards that read, "Hands off Burkina Faso," and Traoré is Africa's lion. The demonstrations were peaceful but filled with fiery speeches against Western interference. Asterisk, Traoré himself addressed the crowd in a defiant tone. We have always known they would try to break us, but Africa is awake now. No amount of sabotage, no amount of lies, no amount of paid traitors can stop the liberation of our people. We are ready to defend our land to the last breath. Asterisk, across social media, hashtags like hashtag Africa Unites, hashtag Stand with TRA or EACUTE, and hashtag Stop Project Phoenix have been trending. As Pan-African activists call for solidarity against what they describe as a new form of colonial aggression. Asterisk, Western governments have so far denied the allegations, with France's foreign ministry issuing a brief statement. France categorically denies any involvement in destabilizing the government of Burkina Faso. We remain committed to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all African nations. Asterisk, but few in the Sahel believe these denials, pointing to decades of coups, regime changes, and economic manipulation by former colonial powers. Asterisk, meanwhile, experts warn that if these allegations are true, and if the West continues to escalate efforts to remove Traoré, the result could be an even wider crisis. Regional tensions could boil over, African unity could fracture further, and even violent clashes between pro- and anti-Traoré forces could erupt. Asterisk, one African political analyst summed it up bluntly. Traoré has lit a fire that can no longer be contained. Either Africa comes together to protect its sovereignty, or it risks being plunged into chaos once again by foreign hands. The next few months will decide the continent's future. Asterisk, as the story unfolds, the world watches with bated breath, wondering if Traoré can withstand the mounting pressure, or if powerful forces will finally succeed in bringing down one of the most defiant African leaders of this generation. Asterisk, as the battle of narratives surrounding Ibrahim Traoré intensifies, another dramatic development has come to light, this time involving the African Union itself. Asterisk, in a heated closed-door session in Addis Ababa, senior O officials reportedly clashed over whether to suspend Burkina Faso's membership altogether, citing what some called flagrant violations of democratic norms. Under Traoré's military rule, asterisk, according to leaks from diplomats who attended the session, A strong bloc led by South Africa, Botswana, and Kenya pushed hard for Burkina Faso to be sanctioned and officially isolated. One delegate reportedly declared, "We cannot continue to pretend that coups and military juntas represent the will of the people. If we let this stand, tomorrow it will be another country. And another, and Africa will go back to the dark days." But the meeting was far from unanimous. Another faction, led by Ethiopia, Guinea, and Mali, forcefully argued against any sanctions, calling Traoré a necessary revolutionary and accusing the O of being a puppet of Western interests. One Malian delegate fired back. Why? Is it that when African leaders stand up against France and the United States, this union suddenly finds its voice to condemn them? Where was the African Union when our people starved under IMF policies? Where was the African Union when foreign troops occupied our lands? Traoré is doing what you have all failed to do, defending Africa's dignity. The argument reportedly became so intense that at one point the O chairperson had to intervene and call for a recess to cool tempers. Outside the conference hall, dozens of activists had gathered, holding up banners that read, "Africa is not for sale," and "Oh, stop serving the West." Others countered with signs saying, "No more coups, and we demand democracy." Analysts say this latest EU dispute highlights just how deeply divided Africa's leadership has become over the Traoré question. On one hand, there is a growing sense among many African governments that the continent cannot afford a return to the era of endless coups and military strongmen. On the other hand, there is undeniable support for Traoré's bold defiance of the West, especially among younger Africans disillusioned by corruption and stagnation under so-called democratic regimes. In the end, the O postponed a final vote on Burkina Faso's suspension, instead appointing a special envoy to Ouagadougou to assess the situation and report back within 30 days. But observers believe the damage may already be done. The rift exposed in Addis Ababa could weaken the African Union's already fragile credibility, and calls into question whether the organization can truly speak with one voice on the issues that matter most to Africans. As one commentator put it on a popular Pan-African radio show, "This is bigger than Burkina Faso. This is about Africa's soul." Do we continue down the path of Western-defined democracy, or do we finally define freedom for ourselves, even if that means tearing up the old rules? Ibrahim Traoré has forced us to answer that question. For now, the debate rages on, with no easy answers, and the entire continent watching closely as history unfolds. As the controversy surrounding Ibrahim Traoré continues to ripple across the continent, yet another unexpected story has emerged, this time from within Burkina Faso itself. In a bold and symbolic move, Traoré's government announced the creation of a brand new Pan-African military academy in Ouagadougou, which they claim will train a new generation of African officers, free from colonial mindsets and loyal only to the people of Africa. Dubbed the Thomas Sankara Academy for Sovereign Defense, the institution is set to open within the year, offering advanced training programs in military strategy, intelligence, cyber warfare, and even political education grounded in Pan-Africanist philosophy. At the Academy's groundbreaking ceremony, Traoré delivered a fiery speech that has already gone viral across social media. Standing before a crowd of thousands, he declared, "For too long, our soldiers have been taught to serve the interests of others, not their own people. They have been trained by foreign generals to kill their own brothers and sisters and to protect the wealth of outsiders. That ends here. This academy will forge a new kind of soldier, a soldier of Africa, by Africa, for Africa." Asterisk, the move is being hailed by Traoré's supporters as a visionary step toward African military self-reliance. Already, delegations from Mali, Niger, and even Guinea have pledged to send cadets to the academy once it opens. Asterisk, in the streets of Ouagadougou, jubilant crowds celebrated with chants of Vive Traoré and Africa must rise. Many young Burkinabés said they see the academy as a chance to break free of dependency on Western military assistance and to reclaim the continent's security on African terms. Asterisk, however. Critics, both inside and outside Burkina Faso, are warning that the academy could be used to indoctrinate soldiers into authoritarian ideologies and cement Traoré's own grip on power. Asterisk, one opposition figure in Ouagadougou told reporters, "We are not against an African military academy. But what is being taught? If this is just a school for coups and propaganda, then it is dangerous for Burkina Faso and dangerous for Africa." Asterisk, in Washington and Paris, officials have expressed concern that the academy could become a breeding ground for anti-Western sentiment and further destabilize the region. One French diplomat called the project a troubling sign of deepening militarization. Asterisk, but Traoré seems undeterred by the criticism. In his speech, he addressed his detractors directly. Asterisk, let them be afraid, let them tremble. Because Africa is waking up. We will train our own protectors. We will defend our own homes. And we will never again kneel to anyone. Asterisk, applications for enrollment have already opened, and the academy reportedly received thousands of inquiries in its first 48 hours, not just from Burkina Faso but from across the Sahel and beyond. Asterisk. Observers say the academy could mark a turning point in Africa's long struggle for autonomy and self-determination, or it could spark a dangerous new chapter in the continent's cycle of militarism and political upheaval. Asterisk, for now, the story of Ibrahim Traoré continues to unfold, and the rest of the world watches closely as the young leader makes yet another bold move that could change the course of African history. Asterisk. In yet another dramatic twist to the Ibrahim Traoré saga, the United Nations this week announced that it is launching a formal human rights investigation into alleged abuses committed under Traoré's military government in Burkina Faso, sparking outrage in Ouagadougou and fierce debate across Africa. Asterisk, the announcement came after a report by an international watchdog accused Burkina Faso's armed forces of carrying out mass arrests, extrajudicial killings, and crackdowns on journalists and activists critical of the junta. The report claimed that in the name of fighting terrorism and foreign influence, Traoré's government has targeted civilians in restive regions of the country and imposed sweeping censorship laws. Asterisk. In a statement delivered in New York, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights said, asterisk, no leader, no matter how popular or revolutionary, is above the fundamental human rights of his people. The reports we have received are deeply concerning and must be investigated. Africa deserves freedom, but also justice. Asterisk, the Burkina government immediately rejected the allegations, calling them fabricated lies designed to discredit a sovereign African revolution. In a fiery televised response, Ibrahim Traoré personally addressed the UN, saying, asterisk, we know this game. The same institutions that were silent when our children starved under Western-backed regimes now pretend to care about human rights because we have rejected their chains. The people of Burkina Faso chose this path, and no one in New York, Paris, or Washington will dictate our future. Asterisk, on the streets of Ouagadougou, thousands of demonstrators marched in support of Traoré, waving banners that read, UN, mind your own business, and Traoré is our voice. Many called the UN probe yet another example of foreign powers using international institutions to punish African nations that resist their control. Asterisk. Reactions from elsewhere on the continent were divided. In South Africa and Nigeria, human rights groups welcomed the investigation, saying the struggle against neocolonialism must never justify abuses of power. But activists in Mali, Niger, and Guinea dismissed the probe as hypocrisy, pointing to the silence of the UN during decades of Western-backed exploitation and corruption. One Malian commentator on state TV put it bluntly, asterisk, when their friends in power steal elections and loot our resources, the UN looks the other way. But when a young African leader finally stands up, suddenly they care about human rights. How convenient. Asterisk analysts warn that the UN move could escalate tensions between the international community and the growing Pan-Africanist bloc led by Traoré. Some fear it could even push Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger closer to leaving more global institutions, just as they recently withdrew from ECOWAS. Asterisk. Meanwhile, Traoré's supporters argue that the allegations themselves are part of a wider propaganda war to weaken the revolution and turn Africans against their own governments. Asterisk. For now, UN investigators say they will continue gathering evidence and plan to send a team to the region in the coming weeks. Whether they will be allowed into Burkina Faso and what they will find remains uncertain. Asterisk. One thing, however, is clear. The Ibrahim Traoré story has become far more than a national struggle. It is now a continental and even global test of the future of Africa's sovereignty, the credibility of international institutions, and the balance between liberation and accountability. And as with every chapter of this saga, the stakes only grow higher. As the storm around Ibrahim Traoré and his revolutionary path deepens, yet another chapter has begun, this time involving a bold economic gamble that could reshape not just Burkina Faso, but the whole of Africa's financial future. Asterisk. In a dramatic address to the nation broadcast live across the continent, Traoré announced that Burkina Faso would immediately abandon the CFA franc, the West African currency still backed and controlled by France, and instead launch a brand new national currency, the Sankara. Asterisk. The decision, which many economists are calling the riskiest move yet by the young leader, is being hailed by his supporters as the ultimate act of economic independence, while his critics warn it could trigger financial chaos in an already fragile country. Asterisk. Standing before a massive crowd in Ouagadougou's main square, Traoré declared, asterisk, for over 60 years, our people have worked and bled while their wealth flowed to Paris. Every grain of gold, every ton of cotton, every drop of our sweat has been stolen through a currency that serves our colonizers, not us. Today that ends. The Sankara will be the symbol of our sovereignty and the engine of our development. Asterisk. The announcement sparked wild celebrations in the streets of Ouagadougou and other cities, with young Burkinab chanting, "Down with the CFA," and "Sankara lives through us." Asterisk. Traoré's government claims the new currency, named after Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader Thomas Sankara, will allow the country to set its own monetary policy, retain control over its foreign reserves, and protect itself from what they call the financial imperialism of Paris. Asterisk. But almost immediately, the move sent shockwaves through West African markets. The CFA franc, already under pressure due to political instability in the Sahel, plunged in value against the dollar and euro. Investors began pulling capital out of Burkina Faso, and regional trade was briefly disrupted as businesses scrambled to adjust prices and contracts to the new currency. Asterisk. France's finance ministry issued a sharp statement condemning the decision as irresponsible and destructive to regional integration. The IMF also expressed grave concern about the potential for hyperinflation and warned Burkina Faso of serious consequences for its economic stability and the livelihoods of its people. But in Mali and Niger, Burkina Faso's closest allies in the new anti-Western bloc, leaders praised the move and signaled they too might follow suit. Mali's president went so far as to say, "This is the dawn of a new era. Africa cannot be free if its money is controlled by outsiders. Traoré has shown us the way." In the streets of Bamako and Niamey, crowds gathered waving Burkina flags alongside their own, chanting slogans of unity and calling for the CFA to be scrapped. Across the entire Sahel, economists are divided on what comes next. Some say the bold step could backfire, triggering inflation, shortages, and capital flight, all of which would hurt ordinary Burkinab and weaken Traoré's grip on power. Others argue that, with proper planning and regional cooperation, the move could mark the beginning of true economic liberation for West Africa. Meanwhile, Traoré seems undeterred. In his closing words at the ceremony, he declared, "We know the path of dignity is never easy, but better to walk it with empty pockets than to crawl in chains with full ones. The Sankara is not just money, it is a promise, and we will honor it." Across Africa, the decision has reignited a fierce debate about sovereignty, colonial legacies, and what real independence looks like. And as the world watches, the young leader's bold bet may determine whether he becomes the architect of Africa's economic renaissance or the author of its next great financial crisis. As Ibrahim Traoré's revolution continues to send shockwaves across Africa and beyond, yet another dramatic chapter has unfolded, this time on the international stage. As a group of African diaspora leaders in Europe and the Americas publicly declared their support for his vision and vowed to launch a Pan-African solidarity movement in his name. At a historic gathering in London, prominent figures from African diaspora communities, including activists, intellectuals, business leaders, and even artists, held a press conference to announce the formation of the Traoré Global Network, a grassroots coalition aimed at uniting Africans on the continent and in the diaspora around his ideals of sovereignty, self-determination, and resistance to neocolonialism. Standing before dozens of cameras, the spokesperson for the group, a well-known Ghanaian British activist, said, "We in the diaspora have watched for decades as Africa's resources were plundered, her leaders corrupted, and her people betrayed. Today, a young man in Burkina Faso has reminded us what courage looks like. Ibrahim Traoré is not perfect, but he has ignited a fire we cannot let die. The time for waiting is over. The African Revolution is here, and we are part of it." The network announced plans to organize rallies, fundraise for development projects in the Sahel, lobby Western governments to end exploitative policies toward Africa, and counter what they called the media smear campaign against Traoré's movement. In Paris, hundreds of African French youth flooded into the streets in solidarity, waving Burkina flags and chanting, "Nous sommes Traoré," "We are Traoré." Similar demonstrations were reported in New York, Toronto, Brussels, and Berlin, where African communities gathered to show support and demand an end to what they described as the demonization of African sovereignty. One Congolese-American student who attended the New York rally said, "We know the playbook when Africans stand up. They call us dictators. When we bow down, they call us partners. Traoré has taught us to stand up, finally." The movement has already raised eyebrows in Western political circles, with some officials accusing it of glorifying military rule and undermining democratic values. Critics warn that it risks radicalizing diaspora youth and deepening divisions between African migrants and their host societies. But supporters argue that the network is not about glorifying coups or rejecting democracy. Rather, it's about reclaiming the narrative and demanding a fairer, more dignified relationship between Africa and the rest of the world. A Nigerian Belgian entrepreneur at the London event summed it up. For too long, our politics have been dictated by foreign interests, and our people forced to choose between two evils. Traoré has given us a third option, ourselves. And now we are here to say, Africa belongs to Africans wherever we are. The Traoré Global Network plans to hold its first International Congress later this year in Accra, Ghana, where delegates from over 20 countries are expected to meet and draft what they are calling a new African Charter of Sovereignty and Solidarity. On the streets of Ouagadougou, news of the diaspora's mobilization was met with pride and excitement. In a televised address, Traoré himself thanked his supporters abroad, saying, "You are proof that Africa lives in every heart, no matter where it beats. Together, we will make the world respect Africa again." With his revolution now transcending borders and inspiring millions across continents, Ibrahim Traoré's story has truly become global, and the question on everyone's mind is whether this new movement will help build his vision of a free Africa, or spark yet another chapter of conflict with the world powers that feel threatened by it.